Good afternoon, LinkedIn and all across the internet. Welcome to this month's L&D Fix. With me today, we've got Ray and Andy, who I'll hand over to for some introductions in a moment. But we're going to be diving into a conversation all about prioritization. How do we as L&D professionals, whether as individuals or across our function, make sure that our effort, energy and expertise is being put into the most valuable places it can be within the organization, especially when we're being pulled in so many different directions. Before we get started, though, please do jump into the chat. Let us know all the usual webinar stuff that no one really cares about, where you're joining from and what the weather's like today. But perhaps more importantly, what are your big challenges around prioritization right now in your organization? Which directions are you and your team being pulled in? And how well or not are you managing to balance those kind of often contradictory challenges? While you're filling that out, let's go through some introductions. Ray, can I come to you first?
Yeah, sure. So, hi, I'm Ray. I am the Learning Experience Design and Systems Manager at a third sector charity in the health and social care sector. It's a charity called With You.
Fantastic. And Andy?
Yeah, I'm Andy McConville. I'm Head of Leadership Development at an outsourcer called Rescue Outsourcing Solutions. I've been there for about just coming up to 3 years. Previously, I worked in TSB in various L&D roles. There's the CV done.
Amazing. There we go. Well, I hired you both for this, so there we go. It's clearly good, clearly good CVs all around. As always, I'm Tom. I'll be your host today and the occasional opinion sharer. And this whole thing is put together in partnership with the team at Thirst. So, with all that in mind, again, do share in the chat sort of those prioritization challenges you're facing right now. But we're going to dive right into what I think we don't often spend enough time thinking about right at the start of this, which is where does this problem come from? You know, why is there this need for us to constantly prioritize? What's the kind of cause of this? Andy, can I come to you first for your experience on what's been the driver for having basically too many requests and not enough resource?
Well, I think we sometimes frame it wrong and say that it is too many. From a tone setting point of view, I think if you're busy, it means you're valued. People are coming to you and asking you to do some stuff that they might not be able to do. So, and then we see it as a sign of failure that we're not able to fulfill all of that challenge. So I think it's important to get that out there first, that this is not a failure thing. It's not a time management issue. This is the way the world is. This is how industry is. We're going to get asked to do a lot of stuff and everybody wants it first. So even if you've got a great governance around prioritization, somebody's going to try and circumnavigate that to say their little bit's slightly more important than that little bit. And that's what we're facing into. So it comes, I think, the evolution of L&D getting better and better at what it does.
Brilliant. And Ray, have you seen sort of similar things or something different?
Absolutely. It resonates 100%. I think that we have this focus on the requester rather than the fact that these are people coming to us seeking help, and absolutely take it as a compliment because it means that your team has in the past delivered on things and helped people out of difficult situations and solved problems for people. But I also think there's a bit of a misunderstanding sometimes about what L&D does, what we can do, what's within our power to change and support and help. And so I think that's sometimes a big driver, because I think a lot of the requests we have coming in tend to not be a learning and development problem to solve.
That's interesting. So, I mean, I guess that kind of idea has been around for a long time, right? And often, unfortunately, it gets distilled down to the advice of, we just need to be really comfortable saying no to people, which is super helpful. Obviously, we're all now well informed. We can just go and start saying no to people. So, I mean, let's dig into that. I appreciate we kind of latched on something quite early, but I think there's quite an interesting conversation to be had around that. In each of your works, how do you go about identifying those situations where, you know, someone is asking for help? Obviously, we want to be helpful, but this isn't our thing. What are those kind of red flags and hallmarks that you look for? Andy, can I come to you first, and then I'll come back to Ray?
Yeah, I love that. I love that you said that. That just say no and feel comfortable about it when you've got a group of stakeholders that you say no to them. And just very very nice. Thanks very much. I go into I think it's around that curiosity, and this is a bit cliche, but the more curious we are about the request and understand it, and really try to get into the where is this coming from? Why does that person believe that they need it done? And then we find out that's the truth. They're right. It needs to be done, but then we find out that it might not be us that does it. That sometimes creates a disconnect where you go, well, that's not us, it's somebody else, particularly depending on how your OD is set up. So you hand it off. So even though you're handing off for the right reasons, you seem to be saying no anyway, and even though you haven't. I do think we could get better at helping somebody work with other departments in your own company, because as the L&D, you're kind of that central function that links into everybody else. So being able to say, well, I'll introduce you to Tom. Tom's going to do this for you, and be part of that introduction and warm that up a little bit. And when you leave that person with Tom or whoever it is, they feel like they're really comfortable in that space. So I think it's the how we do that. So it's training needs analysis, curiosity, getting underneath the surface. But then if you find out it's not you, it's worth spending a little bit more time with the handoff than actually trying to create a solution that isn't really a learning solution, or even getting into the semantics of what is and what isn't, and just going, this is the right person, let me help you get with the right person.
I really like that, because it's kind of that idea of us as the connective tissue within the organization, right? Linking people together. I often about how, like, one of our kind of, it's not an official like skill that L&D has, but we're pretty good at the whole networking thing. Like, we love a conference, a social, a webinar on an afternoon, online communities. Very few other industries do it on the scale and volume that we do, despite being a relatively small industry, which I think tells us a lot about, what we could be doing inside organizations, connecting people. Love that. Ray, what about you? What are you saying?
I think ultimately saying no is not the difficult part. It's saying no without context. That's what damages relationships, right? So we're very big on just say no. Like, if it's not your problem, just say no. But ultimately, we're the ones that have to deal with those relationships that are left over in the background. So I think we need to try and balance being clear with being compassionate, and understanding that someone's coming to you with a problem that they really want your support with. This is really an issue for them. This is really something they feel they need to address, and redirecting that to a team that's going to actually bring them value. But the most important part is making sure they understand that it's not a decision, it's a conversation that you have to have with your stakeholders and say, ultimately, I want you guys to have lasting change and impact out of this. We're not the team that's going to be able to deliver on that for you. I had a previous manager way back that used to say something that stuck with me all the years, but it was, clarity is one of the most respectful things you can give people. And that's the truth. Is if people understand why you're making the decisions you're making, ultimately they will walk away with something tangible that can actually help them still potentially solve their issue, rather than just a flat no.
Love that. I mean, that there's some real thinking there about how we're viewed as a function, right? How many conversations we have, oh, we're not seen as strategic partners, oh, we're not respected by the business. And I think this would be a huge part of that, right? Even when we are not the solution, we don't just have to leave them with only a problem. We can still leave them enriched from having come to us in the first place. Fantastic stuff. We've got some comments coming in, and I want to make sure we pull these in. So Luke, weather is sunny and cold. Lovely. Same here. We were just saying, so far today, I've had snow, sleet, glorious sunshine, and gales. I can see really sad looking sheep in the field next door. It's like, let us inside. But no, that's not going to happen. Biggest problem is cognitive load moving across priorities. I'm not sure about the two of you, but I've found that's like the toughest thing for me. Not so much as a practitioner, but when I was leading teams, getting a team or going to a team and saying, hey, good news, everyone, we're shifting priorities. We're moving, you're working on this, you're working hard, you're doing good work. Stop, we're doing this now. So have you got any thoughts on how do we do that well as a function? Because my concern is always, one, internally, the team never feels good when that happens. drop what you're doing, do something else. It feels somewhat disrespectful to the work you were doing, but also the work you were doing was for a stakeholder as well. So we're then telling that stakeholder, sorry, your stuff's not important anymore. We're doing this instead. So how do we go about having those conversations? Ray, can I come to you first on that one?
Yeah, sure. So, wow, definitely something that my team struggles with all the time. I think it's common for everyone, but ultimately, I think sometimes senior leadership is functioning on a completely different brainwave than what we're at, because we're getting everything trickling down, right? So by the time we're actively involved in projects, they're already considering what the next pieces of work are going to be and the next priorities are going to be. So I think a big part of that, again, comes down to your relationship building, making sure that you have relationships, that you hear things in time and have time to prepare. I cannot stress enough how important it is. Like, L&D is literally the veins to the body of an organization. Like, we should have a finger in every pie, know everyone, be having conversations with everyone, which feels stressful because where do you find the time to do that? But a little bit of investment in the beginning of relationships can really pull you through, and I think that will be one of the biggest things. But the other thing is, if you're lucky enough to have clear business priorities, which, let's be very honest, very few businesses actually have very clear linear objectives to what they want to achieve, that can always help. But ultimately, I think we need to take it back to the impact that we're making and trying to impact as many or as big a portion of the business as you possibly can. Priority areas of the business. That's ultimately what it comes down to. For us in social care, it's the clients. It's the clients that we ultimately end up helping. So we pull everything back to harm reduction and risk. And I think sometimes something we don't think of, we always have that conversation about the impact that things make, right? And how we measure that in L&D is actually quite tricky. But for us, it's a little bit easier. And I think there's an element to it that everyone can take away. But it's, what is the risk of us not delivering on this? I think that's a conversation that we sometimes don't have enough, is what is the risk of us not delivering on this piece of learning? What is the risk of us not attending to this project? It also can help you have those high-level stakeholder conversations, because you help them see the end goal in the end. Okay, if we move away from this priority, that's great, but that means ABC.
Yeah, so kind of having that risk and certainty kind of measure with the business, and that's a conversation I don't think we play in very often. I think we find talking about real business risk quite alien to our conversations often about, pedagogy and all these other things that we think, oh, that's super important, but actually we forget that we are a servant function to the wider business. So really good stuff. Andy?
Yeah, I think what you did really well there, Tom, was describe the feeling that we think that stakeholder we're almost going to drop is going to feel. But Ray mentioned before about that clarity. So there's the having that conversation up front, owning it, and I know that's the cliche as well. You go in and this is what's happening. But if you're in an organization that is meshed together, that change in priority is going to impact them, and you've already started something on their solution. So you could say, this is changing. This is where we got to with it. How much of that is still relevant for you? And do that exchange at that point, so that you still say, I've been thinking about you first, and then you move and pivot, because that's what the expectation is. And I think we work, if you work in a fairly mature organization, people will understand that and they'll get it. And I think we think they'll think we're not very good for doing it, or that we're not very loyal, or we're not very, we're choosing one over the other. But if we describe that in the right way, and we show our decision making, and we're transparent with all of that, a lot of that feeling that you described can be moved away in the right way, and we can move on as adults and get through. And I also think about the quality of our output. So one of the things here is doing less but better. I'll speak for all of us, because I suspect that everybody in LD has a really high standard. So if my second lens on my standard is, Ray, have a look at this, and she looks at it and describes it, and it could be better, we could keep iterating and tweaking and tinkering until it's better. But you frontline, the people that just want the solution, are not as judgy about that stuff as we are in L&D, because they don't live and breathe it like we do. They're thinking about the practical application. So yes, you might have a better authoring tool. Yes, you might want to do a 2-day workshop, but you can still do something in less of a time, and not to see that as a dilution, not to see that as a compromise, to see that's actually a really quality piece of work at the right time, delivered at the right place for the organization for what they need, and then we can iterate it later on. And I think we sometimes tinker a little bit too much, and then we're busy with changes and the priorities change, but we didn't need to worry because we could have been doing less. You know, as per the theme of the talk today. So yeah, it's just one of the things, like, our standards are not their standards. It's very subjective in terms of high and low, and we talk about that strategic alignment. That getting that right and understanding what your frontline needs makes your solution more practical.
Absolutely. I think that's probably one of the biggest lessons I learned sort of middle of my career, was that everything should be an MVP, literally everything. You should launch the first version of the thing you've got as early as possible. And if it sucks, you can fix it, but at least you launch something. Chances are it had some positive impact. Unless you're wildly incompetent, then you find out quickly and you move on from that. That's... jury's out in the case of...
we dilute the language, though, don't we, Tom? We also say, oh, if I'd had a bit longer, or if this hadn't changed, or... And we almost frame it into, I could have done so much better for you, but they're not thinking like that. They're just going, thanks, I needed that quickly, and my God, you turn that around quickly. How brilliant are you? And that's why you're so busy, which is where we started the call today.
This is it. And I mean, ultimately, I'm going to be very blunt. The business doesn't care about the perfection of our work. They care about the impact it has.
Yeah.
Right? Our job is to drive the KPI, to solve that problem, to enable performance, not to create pixel perfect masterpieces that we're proud of and want to show our grandkids. You know, it's, yeah, sometimes I do worry that we think we're going to win an Oscar one day, when in actual fact it's just the KPI. That's the reward. That's what you get. We've got loads of comments coming through, so let's dive into some of these. Susan has said, it's part of a tiny CPD team, 7 of us in an organization of 22,000. That does seem a slightly off ratio to me, but well done for getting through, I guess. That seems like a lot. I've just done a diagnostic of our needs, but now I need to design the skeleton that best meets that need before prioritizing how I put flesh on the skeleton over time. Everyone will tell me they are a priority. Yeah, I mean, we do like our individualism, don't we, as humans? Our problems are entirely unique, and there's nothing else like it in the world. Ray, how do you go about kind of having those conversations when everyone thinks they are or should be the top priority?
I think for us, we're in a slightly more unique situation where there's a lot of our learning that is statutory required. Like there's learning that we have to absolutely deliver on in order to practice safely as an organization, legally within certain laws and remits that have been put in. I think it's a tough one. I mean, we are a team of about 10 people. We have an organization of about 2,000. Balance is way better there, but we are in very high risk scenarios there. And we have just been going through the same thing, creating the lovely magic word framework, which is like one of my least favorite terminologies out there, but frameworks to work along, right? And I think if you want to start fleshing out a framework, you need to start by understanding what your cohorts are. So make sure you have people grouped together in ways that make logical sense for you, in terms of whatever your business outputs are, so that you can have clear cohorts and then start having a look at from a statutory required perspective, what's absolutely necessary from a business perspective, what are the things that you need to work, and then filtering down into soft skills, culture, all of those things. It's generally a good rule of thumb to follow when you're starting from absolute scratch. And as you're talking to SMEs, every SME is 100% going to think that their topic is the most important, but you bring it all back to investment and risk of us not acting on this, risk of, we need to get this out before we can do A, B, and C, because it's foundational learning for other things. So consider all of those things when you're fleshing out a meaty skeleton. But best advice I was ever given in anything in life is keep it simple. Don't go too big too quickly. You start with the bare bones and the basics of absolutely what you need. You can always build it up from there. Don't fall into the trap of creating a content library of 60 plus modules and then sitting with a team of 10 people and not knowing how to keep up with what you already have in place. So yeah, that would be it for me.
So I'll always be thankful for an early colleague I worked beside, a guy called Phil, who drilled into me the idea that in every job there are things you must know, things you should know, and things that are nice to know, and that you should filter everything through that. Because if they haven't got all the need to know, you should not even be considering anything else. Andy, what about you? How do you approach this situation?
Well, first of all, Susan, thank you for taking the time out, because that's you're definitely busy. We'll definitely put that out there for you. Look, I'm not going to reinvent what Ray said and what you've just had to do, Tom. The only addition I would make would be to keep that simplicity is look for the commonality. Look for the commonality across. If it's modular, how many of those 22,000 need the core module, and then you can break that down into more specific stuff for more technical roles. But definitely having that the key thing there, everyone will tell me they are a priority. This seems like you've got the opportunity to show them how you prioritize. So take that as a seek forgiveness, not permission here. Get your prioritization, show them your thinking behind that, and then do all of that great stuff Ray described, and then just look for that commonality across the board as a starting point. It's not a silver bullet, but that's a starting point.
There's a couple of questions that kind of naturally follow on from this, which is around the use of kind of business priorities, data, KPIs. What kind of role do they play in these conversations? Andy, can I come to you first?
Yeah, well, I think the data's everything now, and there's sometimes if you're receiving that request in, you can make the assumption that that's based on data. And then the gap analysis has been done because the data tells us that gap's there. Somebody is doing something, they're not doing something. This KPI isn't where it should be because of. But I would definitely double check that. I would definitely be asking the question on what is telling you that is the thing that you want to work on right now. And then as you evolve as a function, it's start bringing the data to them, because if you're in control of what you do for the business because you've done the analysis, that puts you in a much stronger footing. So you might be in a position now, and again, we're murder for this in L&D to say we shouldn't be order takers, but realistically, sometimes we are, and that's the role we have to play. So that is okay, people, to be an order taker. You're thinking about how do you evolve as a function to be more consultative and work with the organization. So if you are receiving the order, the data is or it isn't there, but find out where it came from. People, opinion, strategic, great, but what did the data tell us? What did the customer tell us? And that is a good starting point, because if somebody goes, oh, well, I haven't thought of that, they might go away and leave you alone for a little bit. They're coming back, but they might leave you alone for a little bit to get on with something else. So it's that ability just to be consultative, even as an order taker. And then when you understand your organization more, you're having more influence, be the person that goes out and says, I've seen a gap because the data told me that.
Mm-hmm.
Love that. I think you're right. We can really beat ourselves up with the whole order taker conversation sometimes. And we always say it's like this binary thing. You're either an order taker or you're consultative in your approach. It's like the best order takers, I think, like if you go and buy a kitchen, you don't just turn up and go, that one, and they go, cool, card transaction. No, they go, oh, okay, and how are you doing this, and how are you going to use it, and and suddenly you're buying an island and an oven and a this, that, and the next thing that you never knew you needed, and probably don't, in fairness. Bad example. But the idea is that they are order taking, but they are also consulting. Yeah. It doesn't have to be exclusively one or the other. So I think there's a lot to explore in there. Ray, data and metrics. What are your thoughts?
I think data is fantastic for strengthening what people have already discussed and picked up. It's not there as a quantitative thing on its own that you can just use to make decisions. We don't use data on its own to make decisions in L&D because we're a people-centered. People-centric is always the first thing you should be thinking about whenever you're doing anything. And the data alone is not going to tell you everything. you can come out and they can say, oh, we have 800 employees who are not completing this task properly in their roles. And the data shows it, and it absolutely puts that forward, and that's great. But when we go and speak to those employees and we say, why do you guys think this isn't happening? They're saying, we don't have time. We don't have time to do that task. It's the least important task on our to-do list. It's not monitored. It's not reinforced. No one checks on, lets us know if we've forgotten to do it. So it's just unimportant. So data is wonderful, but it's there to strengthen. It's never going to be a single source of information. I always rely on conversations, and this feeds back into that clarity again and into that communication and having relationships with people across the business. Being able to have really honest conversations with people will oftentimes help you avoid band-aid solutions where people are just coming to you because they're genuinely coming to you because they believe it's a learning problem. That's the thing. And then it's us that has to do the really hard work of convincing them and putting forward the evidence to say, actually, this is an operations problem. Actually, this might be a different problem, or a different approach might be better for this piece in particular. So I think data is wonderful, but it's never my single source of truth.
Yeah, absolutely. It's always something to apply, as you say. Fantastic. So we got so many questions coming in. This is great. Do keep them coming. We're, as always, discussing what's on your plate right now is a much better use of time than us kind of plowing through with. My opinion on the following is, there we go. So often stakeholders come to us at the point of most pain and expect a very quick resolution within a time frame that's much too tight. And this is a forever problem, right? A decade ago, we were sat around tables going, oh, if only we were included earlier in the process. I suspect it goes back much further than that, and I suspect it will be there in another 10 years. So when someone comes to you and it is, quote unquote, too late, really, like the problem is already upon us. We could have seen this coming. We probably did see it coming, but we've done nothing about it. How do you handle that request? Andy, can I come to you first?
Yeah, so what you've said about there's no point in the lecture of like, if only you'd come to me sooner, is people are not looking to hear that. There is an opportunity at some point in that process to coach that person and help them understand that you could help them mitigate problems sooner if they come to you sooner. But that'll be to do with the quality of what you do right now with that particular problem. So this is an opportunity. And how you go about it, there's several different ways you could do it. So my go-to with this sort of thing is always to do something quickly to show that you can. And again, it's getting out of your head that if it had a bit more time, I'd have done this. And in order to show it for the grandkids, as Tom described before, but do something immediate. You'll have stuff in the toolbox that you can get your hands on. You might be able to get some people together and start getting a movement towards the solving of the problem. It might not be everybody, it might not be full saturation, but it will be something, and it'll be a learning solution because you're the one that's doing it. And remember, you're the expert, so you're going to galvanize what's immediate, what's in front of you, and get stuff moving forward. Once that movement starts, you start to get underneath the surface of where the problem came from, and that might be a bit of a sticking plaster to start with, but you'll slow it down, make some improvements, like get it to a point, and then you start to work on your much more in-depth, long-term solution that future-proof solution that cuts it off. Loop it back into, does it hit your induction material? Does it hit other teams? Is it going to come and hurt somebody else? So are they going to come to you with an immediate problem? So that gives you the chance to go in and consult with them. But the whole thing is, for credibility, for understanding it is a problem, do something quickly, and then start to build on it after that.
Absolutely. I was working with a really great L&D team a few months ago, and they almost viewed these as a bit like when someone comes into like A&E, and it's like, first things first, you've got to assess the damage and then say, do we need to stop the bleeding? Is that an immediate concern? Is there like, actually, we're going to end up in court if this carries on, or we're losing X many £1,000s an hour, or whatever it might be. So I think you're spot on. And I think that exactly right. Ray, what about you? How do you approach these situations?
So our team actually has an agreed sort of between me. My team itself is actually quite small within the wider structure of our team, but we have essentially an agreed process for MVPs. So for different kinds of learning solutions, we have like a little checkbox. It's super simple that just lays out, this is the minimum things we have to meet in order to actually put out something in some sense of a learning. And that really helps us with those quick turnarounds, because as much as we don't want to work reactively, we work in health and social care. And sometimes people's lives and well-being are at stake with some of the things that our staff need to know and be equipped with. And we can't always say no. There just are situations where they're going to come to us and say, this is an issue. This has been flagged in 7 services. We need to get something out immediately. And so having those sort of pre-agreed MVPs in place for things, and then it definitely feeds into exactly what Andy is saying. Like Andy's hit it on the money there. This has been brought up a few times already today, but we need to stop being so precious over everything we're holding on to, because as much as we want to create the very best thing we can for the end user and the learner at the end of the day, it's always changing. The benchmarks are always changing. They're always shifting. That module that your team created this month that has gotten so much lovely feedback from everyone is going to be completely unnecessary in 8 months, or need a complete overhaul in 8 months, because all the language has changed, laws changed, things have changed. So we need to stop being so precious, about the materials that we're putting out, and then just make sure you have a plan for those short-term cut-arounds, and so that you have a really clear process you can put forward to people and say, right, this has been flagged as an emergency piece of work. This is our process for emergency pieces of work. These are the timeframes in which we can get something turned around. And it's not going to be perfect. We're going to aim for a 75% on what we need to cover here. And we will continue to work with you on what this is going to look like in the long term. But it's so important to have that backup plan in place. And it's going to feel terrible writing those things down and agreeing those MVPs. But I promise you, when crunch time comes, you're going to be so thankful you have it in place, because it's been signed off by people, it's been approved, the process has been approved, and you don't have to sit and stress and worry about, are we doing this? Are we doing enough, basically?
I love that, because we spend so much, we kind of know when we're designing training that you don't just follow the happy path. You've got to know that people are going to face struggles, and then in our own workflows, we kind of assume everything will run smoothly all the time. Yeah, love that. We've got loads more comments coming in. Thank you all for being so engaged. This is really interesting stuff. So sometimes L&D are seen as transactional and not transformational. I will add to that, sometimes L&D is transactional and not transformational. I would point towards our approach to, it's just compliance training being a key reason why we are often seen as transactional, because we let the biggest opportunity we have to transform the whole business once a year just go by as, just a quiz based on last year's data. It's a real wasted opportunity. But we've got a whole session on my obsession with the compliance training, so we shan't go into that today. I spend time helping the organization understand what we do, and they sometimes confuse me with HR. Everyone will have a different opinion on being confused with HR. Me, I'd be very upset. And slightly confused as to how they made that confusion. I don't think it's really a problem I'm going to have. But it does raise an interesting question, because I find that there is sometimes a lot of issue around prioritization when people don't know what we do and don't do. So what kind of communication work can we be doing to make sure the organization does understand, not once the building's on fire, but well ahead of time, how to engage with us and what we can and maybe can't help with? Andy, can I come to you first on that one?
Yeah, there's actually somebody put on the chat before about a tip on this. I'll get somebody look for that. It was quite useful. But I'm not so precious about the HR thing, because I'm in my world, in all my experience, I've been attached to an HR function, and then I decided to branch out and understand the more about the people function. So I guess I try to get comfortable with the why people sort of saw that, and see you sitting alongside that same type of role. But granted, that will then start taking up your time if you're dealing with those issues rather than the learning stuff. I think you've said the right thing about the whole transaction versus sometimes it is and sometimes it isn't. It's not, you don't have to be one or the other. And it's being comfortable with that. I think we're not very good as an industry at marketing a learning campaign. So if we went into our business and said, this is what you all need, and we were that proactive going in, we're still not very good at marketing that. And we're not very good at marketing, describing what we actually do and don't do and why. That's pinching Ray's right at the start. It's the why. We're like that. So there is the taking the opportunity to educate your stakeholders every time you have those interactions about what is within your realm of possibility and what's not. But if you do get a chance to kind of have, if you've got any sort of interlock meetings where you're kind of like sharing that with other parts of the business, get yourself front and center on those. Describe what you do, describe what you want people to come with you, describe what you'll do for them. If you can start putting in regular calls, and again, this is counterintuitive because it's let's take some more time out the diary to do some more stuff. But that stuff is value add because you're talking to people, and you do it as a consultation. And within that, you get to describe what you actually can do. And then you get to do the little handoff thing that I talked to you about before as well. Because if you hear something, it's great. That's an HR piece. Let me introduce you to somebody in that function. So it is the bit about doing different things. So you might be doing something. Can you take something out and replace it with this? And get across your organization, but also think about how you're marketing yourself as a function. How are you selling it internally about what you do, what you don't do, and it will create a deeper understanding and better engagement, better communication.
Absolutely. I think just on the marketing point, I think it's a real big area for improvement for us. If it's something you're looking to work on, there's a fantastic book called Think Like a Marketer by Bianca Bowman and Mike Taylor. It's well worth a read. So there you go. There's my obligatory book recommendation for today's session. Fantastic. Doesn't take long to read. Very practically focused, all about efficiency and what we can take from marketing. Ray, how do you approach this kind of preemptive communication, if you will?
So, I mean, just to echo what Andy said there at the one point, but I think for a long time as L&D as a whole, we were confused about what we do. And I think we're only really getting into a space now where we're starting to understand where we need to be involved, how we can be involved, and how we can actually affect things. Because essentially, like, we all come from the space of education, right? We were seen as organizational education teams. And it's only now that we're really starting to move out of that education mindset into learning and development being the key kind of like word there. So absolutely make sure that you as a team know what it is that you do, because that's such a strange thing. Like we recently had a team building activity where we literally looked at McDonald's business plan and how they viewed themselves. And we laid that out and we were like, right, so who are our clients? You know, what is it that we do? What is our specialist areas? What don't we do? What's not in our area? So that as a team, you're always speaking from the same voice. But beyond that, I think it's really, really key, again, to be advocating for yourself in every conversation that you have with stakeholders. But ultimately, you as a team really have to understand what it is that you guys are able to deliver on. So as a team, we deliver on a lot of really bespoke learning that isn't possible to get elsewhere, because we're in health and social care. We're in a very sort of like niche market of health and social care. And so a lot of it's really, really bespoke. And we have a lot of really knowledgeable people within our organizations that can directly be our SMEs. Wonderful. That's great for us. When it comes down to things like environmental awareness and, you know, these compliance activities that we need to bring in, we just have to have very frank conversations where we say it's not worth our time. We would be much better utilized making bespoke learning for the organization. Let's just buy that package in. Let's just find an organization who does specialize in it. It clears off our workflow. And sometimes those are difficult conversations to have and to kind of like get the buy-in for. But when you tell them, well, this is what we could deliver on for you if we buy in A, B, and C, and we just automate all of that out, we would actually be able to focus more on what we need in the organization and what's been flagged as an actual need. So it's two aspects. It's knowing what you do and making sure you can do that really well. And it's about, again, that marketing approach, understanding who you are as a team and being able to kind of set that brand out for yourselves.
Fantastic. I want to slightly switch gears because there's a comment that's come in that I think raises a really interesting point. The comment's quite long, but I think it will fit in. So something I see a lot of is legacy programs and processes that nobody's reviewed in years. They quietly fill up calendars, steal capacity, all that sort of stuff. Finding the dead wood and cutting it is obviously really, really important. I'm not going to read out the whole thing, but it's a great comment. Thank you, Luke. I refer to these as zombie courses when I work with businesses, and they are everywhere, just basically eating the brains of our people. There we go. There was a kind of tangential link to zombies there. Honest, it's not just a great slide when people on deleting stuff, but removing dead wood, I think, is a really important thing to discuss when we're talking about prioritization of energy, resources, and effort. Has anyone got any thoughts about how we do that? Because certainly in my experience, it can be the case that something appears to be utterly pointless, but its point is that someone who's important cares very deeply about this program, even though it doesn't really do much. So how do we go about, first of all, finding those that zombie courses, deadwood, whatever we want, and then what do we do about them? How do we go about removing positively rather than just burning stuff? Ray, can I come to you first?
You're welcome to. We've just gone through a massive project like this. So we've taken all of our compliance and we've taken a really, really good look at it. We were sitting on something ridiculous, like a new starter coming in and doing 32 work hours of just compliance before they even got into the real stuff that's actually relevant for their roles. And so we took a really, really, really staunch approach with it. And we said, what is by law required for people to know? What do they need to know to work safely within their roles? So what is contextual to the organization? And a lot of it, we've decided to just buy in external packages from suppliers. We're lucky enough, again, in health and social care. ELFH is wonderful for those of you that are in health and social care and don't know, massive repertoire library of content that's available for free for organizations. So we were able to bring in those. And feeding into what Andy mentioned earlier about being modular, we have all of our base content, which is the bare bones basic that everyone has to do. And if you're a step up, for example, if you're moving up into being a nurse, you might have a micro-learning that attaches to that compliance topic to give you a little bit more context into what that means for your role within the organization and the process that are specific to you. So sometimes there are bits and pieces like that, but we've managed to cut down our compliance package from 32 hours to, I think we're sitting on 11 now, which is a huge, absolutely huge comeback. But I think the important thing is navigating when we're saying dead weight and we're like cutting off that dead wood and we're moving it out. It's about acknowledging that that information is still important, but it might just not be important on day one of a new starter's journey, or it might not be important enough to be a 3-hour module. Sometimes we need to displace content into a content library where people can search up additional information on topics that they need. So we need to really consider that. When do we need this and how often are they actually going to need to access it? Is this self-service stuff that they should just be able to search up whenever they feel they need it? Is it contextual knowledge, or is it knowledge that they absolutely have to know on a day-to-day within their role? So I think that's a really good place to start, is to have a look at what you have in your content library and make sure you're looking through that lens. What do people absolutely need to know? What's nice to know? And what might they be curious about down the line?
Brilliant. And Andy, what about yourself?
Just tempted to shout testify and move on, but I'm not. We're gonna. So Fiona's put in the comments about who's got an LMS, who hasn't, and there's a bit there. So I think it's one of the banes of L&D, isn't it? When you become the curator of mass content, and then particularly if you're in an organization that doesn't want to just learn their job, but you're also responsible for the development of the people, and you start curating more and more and more. In a previous role, I'm going to say we were naughty. Somebody accused that I was naughty, but I'll go we were naughty. And we just retired a load of stuff. We didn't delete it. We just retired a load of stuff and thought, well, we were in that sort of, sometimes we were order taker and sometimes we were consultative. So we just waited to find if people come and said, there used to be a course on this, where's it gone? And, oh, there it is. Don't know why. So, but that rarely, if ever, happened. So there is a bit about being brave around how many people have done it, when did the last do it, who needs it. If you know that you've got a kind of a policy holder going to them and saying that. And again, that can be privileged. Not all organizations have that. But yeah, so there is a bit of being brave about it's your learning function. You are the learning function. You curate the learning, therefore you can retire the learning, or should I say, archive it. I guess that would be very different in Ray's world because it's very regulated. I worked in financial services; it was more regulated, so we had some hard lines of what you didn't do with certain content. So that there's that. I'd go back to saying it's the getting your curation right and having stuff in the right place, even if you haven't got bells and whistles LMS, because I know not everyone has one. But if you've got a way of curating the content and separating it out, it's useful because it just helps you keep on top of it. And then having, as robust as you can, a check-in with the content and the policy owner. So you might house it for the policy owner. And there's always nuance to all of this and different ways of doing it. So it's just about how do you annually every 6 months review whether this particular thing is still valid or not, and how do you do the update side of things. But that does take capacity. So getting that as robust as you possibly can is kind of key to that. And if you're not sure about stuff, park it somewhere. Don't delete anything. House it somewhere else. And if somebody wants it, they'll come for it.
Great stuff. We are into our last kind of like 13 minutes here on today's session. Yeah, I know, time flew by, right? Never. 3 L&D professionals, turns out, can fill an hour very easily. So let's do one last question from the chat, and then I want to pull together with a bit of reflection on everything we've discussed. So on the note of curation, what about learning pathways for all that library content? I'm going to add a bit onto this. So do we strive to carefully create learning pathways to help learners and direct them? Or is this something that's changing? Are we now in the world of let people search and put things together themselves, or is there some kind of middle ground? Ray, can I come to you first?
I would say there's a middle ground between that. I think it's again going to touch on, is this stuff that staff need to know? Is this business critical stuff that we're talking about here? Or is it just people wanting to learn a new skill or develop something, or potentially go back to something, a task they'd have to do only once a year, and it's just a quick scribe or a quick step-by-step on where they can find what they need to complete this process? I think ultimately there's a fine line between it. I would never go through the effort of curating want to know information ever. It's just not a good use of my team's time. We have too much business critical harm associated stuff that we need to really make sure is being driven in and happening. So I would never curate it, but it also depends on what the systems are that you have in place. I mean, I oversee any of the systems that touch our learning, organizational development. We've recently rebranded. So I'm lucky enough to sort of have a good view on what our systems can do for us. If you guys have systems in your teams, make sure they work for you. If they don't work for you, cut them and find one that does. Because there's a hell of a lot of systems out there, really, really good ones that don't have to cost you an absolute arm and a leg, that can do basic groundwork like that for you. Have a basic tagging system, can search up keywords within articles or within stuff that you have laid out. So I know it sounds very lush to be able to just say, find a system that works for you. But ultimately, if you guys have systems and they're just not working for you, review that, because that is going to save so much of your team capacity, especially around things like that. Learning pathways, in my opinion, should be reserved for really critical stuff that someone needs to move through from A to Z. Don't sweat the small stuff. Keep it simple and make sure that whatever you're doing is working for you.
Great. Andy, can I come straight to you on that one?
I have a very similar view. I think it's one of the things, pathways. There's this thing going on at the minute going, you said on LinkedIn, is traditional learning dying and is it new way? Well, nobody ever described what traditional learning was in the first place. I've never seen but pathways have always been about. So that suggests that in the right circumstances, they still work. so we're not going to fix that. But to the point Ray made, if you try and create a pathway for every single role, for every single development line, it is soul destroying and exhausting for your learning function. And ultimately, it's just not a value add. So yes, for the right roles, and you will know what the right roles are because you're the one doing the consultation. You're the one going out there and finding out what the critical mass is there to create those roles against. And then again, that bit about LMS, there's so many things now that curate in a really good way that are smart searching. You don't have to have a really expensive solution to that. So you could be saving yourself money on an LMS, and that might create a head for you or something like that, or a part-time role in that. So you just get some wins in that way as well. But yeah, I'm not going to reinvent the wheel on that one because Ray nailed it, to be fair.
Fantastic. So we are down to our last 9 minutes. And I want to make sure that we're all walking away with some concept of like, right, where can I get started? So imagine, if you will, I am someone tuning into this session, stood atop my own metaphorical Mount Crumpet, full of all the extra points for anyone in the chat that recognizes the Mount Crumpet reference. Any Dr. Seuss fans in the house? Probably not, because no one else here is like 3 years old like me. Anyway, moving on. If I'm there, stood atop this mass of existing content and processes and policies and relationships with the organization and new requests coming in all the time, where should I start in terms of prioritizing if I'm currently feeling that I'm a bit sort of just basically getting through each day? Where would you start in that scenario? Andy, can I come to you first?
I knew you were going to make me go first on this one. Look, I think it goes back to that network. You're not that you can feel like the single point of failure there, and it's understandable, but you're not. So there's about using that network. We almost started the call with a network, so let's finish the call with a network. Get the people around you that know that. Describe the challenge that you're facing. You will get some understanding, and there will be some aligned prioritization from the front line. People will be able to see the challenge that you're facing and get the people around you that can help. I've seen learning go through cycles where we were the gatekeepers, so we don't want to give it away, but now we're too busy because we have to own it all. And I've seen it where learning's been centralized and then almost becoming universities and has become universities. And then you get SMEs doing it because we've said no too much. So you've got cottage industry going on. So there is a bit about thinking how you can evolve from that overseer and not gatekeeper. So I'll help people in the organization be better learning professionals on the front line rather than try to be the gatekeeper for all of the learning material. So that's where you're trying to get to. And to do that, you need people around you that know more than you do about the role that you're trying to help support and learn and develop in that space. So that would be me kind of in there. There's some tips. Yeah. So get a network around you, support others to be better learning professionals, even if they've not got learning in the title, and oversee rather than gatekeep.
Fantastic. Really, really like that. A lot of connection and empowerment of other people. That's so often missing. Ray, what about yourself?
Trying to not repeat everything Andy's already said. I think one of the main ones would be, let's go back to that review point. Have a look at what your team is doing. Have a look at what you're spending the most time on. Have a look at which tasks are the most soul draining, because let's just be honest, some things we're also just doing because we have to. Have a realistic look at your process and how you guys are ironing things out, because there's 10 million really good processes out there that are evidence-based and they're fantastic, but that does not mean you have to imply it every single step, every checkbox to your organization. So make sure that your processes are working for you. Make sure that the content that you guys are actually actively putting time into is worth you putting the time into it. So do a review of that. I think that would be step one for me. And step two, I think, is again bringing it back to the people element, is understanding that not every problem is a learning problem, but every request deserves a response that helps. So ultimately, it's making sure that you get into a space where you can be okay to pass things along, because sometimes they have to be passed along. We have having big conversations in our team at the moment around what is in-service learning, on-the-job learning, and what is actually, what can we give to people, and how that's a very, very big difference. There's also that whole conversation around competency versus compliance, right? Huge thing. Make sure that you guys understand that everything that you put out, you can guarantee compliance, like competency, compliance on things. You can say that someone's done something. Oh, they've done the quiz. They passed the quiz with 80%. They have their compliance status on this. But that does not mean that we can guarantee people in their roles are actually doing the things that they know they should be doing. And so there's a very big difference between compliance and competency. Make sure that your team is feeling comfortable with that, so that you can hand over what's not yours to carry. Competency is not yours to carry. That falls on managers and team leaders and infrastructure coaching, mentoring, shadowing, all of that stuff that needs to happen in the business, in office, all of that. So I find a lot of L&D teams that I speak to tend to be holding on to that. And I'm just like, it's not yours, let it go. So that would be the two things. It would be have a review of your processes and everything, make sure that everything's working for you. And on the second point is just make sure that you're very clear on what you should have ownership of and what's not yours.
Amazing. Well, I think two sets of advice there that sit really nicely together and are a perfect way for us to finish off this conversation. It's a really good time as well to say thank you to both Ray and Andy for coming and sharing your insights and experience with us today. This is kind of one of the nicest things about these sessions, is we get to hear from people all across our industry about these topics that are really important right now. Pardon me. Apparently, I'm going to be losing my voice fairly soon. But this really is one of those topics right now where Andy's very pleased with that. There we go. This is one of those topics right now where this is incredibly important. So I would just, if you're here listening to this today, really do go back, take 10 minutes, 15 minutes after this session if you can, and just sit and think about how you can apply it. Because it won't be lift and shift. It won't be lift this template and slap it onto your organization. It's always about adopting what you can and adapting what doesn't quite fit so that you can still find value in it. But prioritization and making sure our effort is going into the right places is more important now than ever. In a world where we're being challenged by technological and economic change, we're under greater scrutiny than we have, I would say, in over a decade in terms of what impact are we having, what is our value to the business. Making sure that we're aligned to the areas where we can really have an impact and we are using things correctly is really, really vital. Thank you for joining us today. We do have our next L&D Fix set for the 22nd of April at 3 o'clock again, and we'll be diving into AI in practice, taking a look at what's actually working and not just what LinkedIn says is working in small and medium L&D teams across the industry. Thank you to our speakers. Thank you to everyone for joining, and we will see you next month.